What does success really mean? Is it fame, money, awards? Or is it something deeper, something harder to measure? And what happens when someone gives their entire life to helping others, yet can't protect their own heart from breaking? Today's story isn't just about gospel music. It's about sacrifice, resilience, faith, injustice, and the painful truth that sometimes the strongest people endure the deepest wounds. This is the life of Shirley Caesar, a woman who lifted millions with her voice, fed thousands with her generosity, and yet faced betrayals that nearly broke her spirit. But before the Grammys, before the packed arenas, before the standing ovations, there was a 7-year-old girl who had no choice but to sing for survival. And her story begins in poverty. A childhood built on loss and hunger. Shirley Caesar was born on October 13, 1938, in Durham, North Carolina, the 10th child in a family of 13. That alone tells you something. But numbers don't explain hunger. They don't explain crowded bedrooms, worn shoes passed from sibling to sibling, or the quiet panic that comes when you realize there may not be enough food for everyone tomorrow. Her father, James Caesar, worked grueling shifts in a tobacco factory. On weekends, he sang gospel music with a group called the Just Come Four. His voice filled churches with hope, but hope didn't fill dinner plates. No matter how hard he worked, it wasn't enough to support 8 daughters and 5 sons. Shirley's mother, Hattie, was partially disabled and lived in constant pain. Still, she stretched pennies into meals and taught her children something more valuable than money: endurance. From her mother, Shirley learned that survival wasn't about comfort. It was about grit, faith, and refusing to give up when quitting felt easier. Then, in 1945, everything collapsed. Shirley was 7 years old when her father suddenly suffered a brain seizure and died. No warning. No goodbye. One moment he was there, the next he was gone. And just like that, Shirley's childhood ended. Imagine being 7 years old and realizing your family no longer has an income. Imagine knowing that 13 people now depend on nothing but faith and resilience. What would you do? Who would you become? For Shirley, the answer came quickly and painfully. She would sing. When a voice becomes a job. Shirley didn't start singing for applause. She started singing so her family could eat. There was no time to grieve. No soft landing. No gentle transition into adulthood. Instead, she stood on church stages, her feet barely touching the floor, and sang with the urgency of someone who understood that her voice meant survival. By age 10, congregations were stunned by her powerful alto. Church leaders had to place her on wooden crates so people could see her, but when she opened her mouth, grown men cried. They called her Baby Shirley, not because she sounded young, but because she looked like a child carrying a grown woman's burden. But talent didn't protect her from exploitation. By 14, Shirley was traveling alone through the Jim Crow South. Sleeping in bus stations, clutching the hamburger and cherry Coke her mother packed for her, sometimes waiting all night just to be picked up by the next church. Some pastors paid her 50 cents for a week of singing, then pocketed hundreds in offerings. She endured manipulation before she even knew the word for it. Still, she kept singing. Not because she wanted fame, but because her family needed her. Ask yourself, how many children today carry adult responsibilities like that? And what does that kind of pressure do to someone's heart before they've even learned how to protect it? A daughter before everything else. As Shirley's voice grew stronger, her mother's health grew weaker. One of Hattie's legs became paralyzed. She struggled to walk. And Shirley, still barely a teenager, became her full-time caregiver. She bathed her, dressed her, cooked for her, lifted her when she fell. Then she left to sing in churches to pay bills, and came home to do it all again. This wasn't for a year or 2. She did this for more than 3 decades. Even after fame came, Shirley never hired outside help. She believed caring for her mother wasn't a burden, it was a calling. But devotion like that carries a cost. It means exhaustion, loneliness, missed opportunities, emotional weight no one applauds. Have you ever loved someone so deeply that their suffering becomes your own? And what happens when that responsibility doesn't end? Not in months, not in years, but in decades. The voice that called her. In 1956, Shirley enrolled in college to study business. It made sense: stability, security, a future that didn't depend on applause. But life had other plans. One day, during a typing test, she heard a voice call her name. She turned around. No one was speaking. Later that same day, she heard it again, clearer this time. "Behold, I have called you from your mother's womb, and I have anointed your lips to preach the gospel." It didn't feel like a thought. It felt external, commanding. Shirley was shaken to her core. She dropped out of college immediately. Her professors were stunned. Her family was confused. But Shirley didn't hesitate. She believed that voice wasn't human. It was divine. Now ask yourself, how many people would walk away from security because of a calling they couldn't explain? How many would risk everything on faith alone? Shirley did. The Caravans and the Road of Fire. On August 15, 1958, at just 19 years old, Shirley joined the Caravans, one of the most influential gospel groups in America. She boldly approached their leader, Albertina Walker, and told her she could sing every part. Then she proved it. But Shirley didn't just sing. She moved. She danced. She shouted. She cried. She broke nearly every rule of traditional gospel performance, and audiences loved her for it. During her first recording session in December 1958, engineers couldn't believe the power in her voice. The group sold over 50,000 records that year. Massive for gospel music at the time. Yet behind the success, Shirley was still sleeping on buses, skipping meals, and earning almost nothing. Her struggle hadn't started with the Caravans. She had recorded her first song, "I'd Rather Jesus," at just 13. Labels rejected it, saying she was too young to understand pain. So she sold it herself, traveling with a one-legged preacher through barns and tiny churches, earning $5 or $15 a night. The record sold fewer than 1,000 copies. Most people would have quit. She didn't. From 1958 to 1966, Shirley toured relentlessly. More than 300 shows a year across the Deep South. White gospel groups earned up to $800 per show. The Caravans were paid $150, split among members. In Birmingham, Alabama, they were turned away from 17 hotels and slept on their bus. In Mississippi and Georgia, Shirley witnessed police blasting black crowds with fire hoses. In Montgomery, bottles were thrown at them during performances. But instead of shrinking, Shirley absorbed the pain and poured it into her music. Her songs became coded messages of survival and resistance. Her voice became a weapon against despair. How does someone turn trauma into triumph without losing themselves? Shirley did, but not without scars. Walking away from security. By 1966, Shirley was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally and financially. Despite her fame, she earned only $75 a week. Male singers earned 5 times more. She asked Albertina Walker for better pay and creative control. The answer was no. Even when offered $100 a week and 5% royalties, Shirley walked away from the Caravans, the biggest group in gospel music. People warned her not to. Magazines predicted failure. Record executives said she wouldn't survive solo. Even Mahalia Jackson advised against it. But Shirley listened to the same voice she'd trusted before. She signed with HOB Records for $50,000, the largest contract ever given to a black female gospel artist at that time. In 1967, she released her first solo album, My Testimony. It sold modestly, but its impact was massive. She sang about poverty, doubt, racism, exhaustion, and pain. Some critics said it wasn't churchy enough. Shirley didn't care. She wasn't performing religion. She was telling the truth. When gospel hit mainstream television. In 1969, Shirley appeared on The Mike Douglas Show. Most guests sang softly. Shirley didn't. She brought the full fire of the black church. Shouting, tambourine, emotion, power. CBS phone lines exploded. Over 3,000 calls poured in within hours. Some viewers were outraged. Others were stunned. For many white Americans, it was the first time they'd seen authentic gospel worship, and it shook them. Shirley wasn't trying to shock anyone. She was being real. And real disrupts expectations. The song that changed everything. In 1972, Shirley recorded Put Your Hand in the Hand of the Man from Galilee. Others had sung it before, but Shirley's version carried urgency, conviction, and soul. It won her a Grammy, her first. But backlash followed. Traditional gospel leaders accused her of commercializing sacred music. Too pop. Too mainstream. Shirley didn't apologize. She said she was still singing for God, even if the sound changed. That Grammy placed her in history as one of the first black gospel artists to truly cross into the mainstream. Her acceptance speech was simple. First, I want to thank God. In a room filled with pop and R&B stars, the silence was deafening. Africa. And a different kind of poverty. In 1975, Shirley toured West Africa, and what she saw changed her forever. At one outdoor concert, over 250,000 people showed up. Many had walked for days. Some hadn't eaten in nearly a week. Their clothes were torn. Their bodies thin. But their eyes were alive with hope. On stage, Shirley abandoned the set list. She began praying aloud, singing about hunger, survival, and faith, because pretending everything was fine felt dishonest. The tour itself was chaotic. They were paid in currency they couldn't exchange. At one point, her team didn't even have enough money to fly home. Still, Shirley said that trip reshaped her ministry. It reminded her of her childhood, the hunger, the desperation, the survival. And when she returned to America, she couldn't just sing anymore. She had to act, giving half of everything away. In 1969, Shirley founded the Shirley Caesar Outreach Ministries in Durham, but the decision came from heartbreak. One Thanksgiving in Florida, she was enjoying food and laughter when she turned on the news. She saw children in Tennessee, starving, bellies swollen, eyes hollow, and she broke. She said later, I couldn't enjoy my meal knowing babies were going to sleep hungry. That night, she made a decision. She would give away half of everything she earned, every check, every royalty, every tour payment, to help the poor. Not someday. Immediately. She funded soup kitchens, food banks, clothing drives, rent assistance programs, and emergency shelters. She quietly paid hospital bills for strangers. She helped families avoid eviction. She fed people who never knew her name. No cameras. No press releases. Just compassion. Ask yourself, how many people give when it's easy, but how many give when it costs them comfort? Love. And the betrayal that almost broke her. In 1983, at age 45, Shirley married Bishop Harold Williams. She believed she had finally found partnership, someone who shared her faith, her values, her purpose. But behind closed doors, the truth was different. Over time, she discovered that he had misused church funds, money that belonged to struggling families. Even worse, she learned he had fathered a child with another woman during their marriage. The betrayal shattered her. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost trust. She lost safety. She lost the belief that her home was her refuge. Divorce followed, and so did humiliation, gossip, and emotional devastation. Have you ever poured everything into someone, only to discover they were never who you believed? And how do you heal when the wound comes from the place you thought was safest? Shirley nearly walked away from ministry altogether. But instead, she sang. The strength that came from brokenness. In the years that followed, Shirley poured her pain into her music like never before. Her songs became deeper, more vulnerable, more honest. She wasn't just singing about faith. She was singing about heartbreak, about betrayal, about survival, about standing back up when everything in you wants to stay down. Albums like Live, He's Working It Out for You and Stand Still resonated deeply with audiences because they weren't polished, they were real. She wasn't pretending life was easy. She was testifying that faith didn't mean immunity from pain. It meant refusing to let pain have the final word. Legacy. And the question she leaves us with. Over her career, Shirley Caesar won multiple Grammys, Dove Awards, and Stellar Awards. She became known as the Queen of Gospel Music. She served as a pastor, community leader, and mentor to younger artists. She fed tens of thousands. She inspired millions. But her legacy isn't measured in trophies. It's measured in lives changed. In people who didn't starve because she gave. In souls who didn't quit because she sang. In hearts that learned survival was possible, because she lived it. Yet even now, her story leaves us with uncomfortable questions. What does success really mean if it doesn't come with peace? What does faith look like when it doesn't stop pain, but helps you survive it? And how many of the strongest people we admire are quietly carrying wounds we never see? Shirley Caesar didn't just sing gospel music. And through it all, she kept lifting her voice. Not because life was easy, but because hope was necessary. So maybe success isn't fame. Maybe it isn't money. Maybe it isn't awards. Maybe success is this. Still singing, even when your heart is breaking. Still giving, even when you've been betrayed. Still believing, even when life hasn't been fair. And still standing, when everything tried to knock you down. Because sometimes, the greatest victories aren't public. They're personal. And Shirley Caesar's greatest triumph was surviving and helping others survive, too. They looked like the children she'd seen in Africa. Small frames, hollow eyes, ribs visible beneath thin skin. A silence in their faces that felt heavier than words. Shirley Caesar had performed for massive crowds before. Thousands standing, hands lifted, voices singing her lyrics back to her. She'd stood on world-class stages with orchestras behind her and spotlights above her. But nothing had prepared her for this moment. She was backstage after a concert, still in her robe, still sweating from worship, when volunteers brought children into the room so the artists could meet the families the ministry supported. And suddenly, she wasn't Shirley Caesar the singer. She was Shirley Caesar the witness. One little boy reached for her sleeve, not asking for autographs or photos, just holding on, as if she might disappear. A girl no older than 6 stared at her shoes and whispered thank you, though Shirley hadn't done anything yet. In that moment, Shirley realized something terrifying. Singing wasn't enough. Not when children were starving. Not when mothers were choosing between food and medicine. Not when faith was preached on Sunday but forgotten on Monday. So she made a decision that shocked even the people who loved her most. She pledged 50% of her concert earnings, not profits, earnings, to fund food programs, shelters, addiction recovery homes, and community outreach. No government grants. No corporate sponsors. No tax loopholes. Just her money. People tried to stop her. Her accountant said it was financially reckless. Friends warned she'd ruin herself. Industry executives said she was sabotaging her career. But Shirley believed something different. She believed faith wasn't applause. Faith was action. Faith was sacrifice. Faith was showing up when no one else wanted to. And she didn't want to talk about helping people. She wanted to actually help them. Ask yourself, how many celebrities talk about giving back, and how many give away half their income to do it? Shirley did. And that decision nearly destroyed her financially. There were years when she barely broke even. Times when she borrowed against future shows just to keep the ministry doors open. Months when she slept on church floors during tours because hotels cost too much. Seasons when she quietly skipped personal medical care so others could eat. People called her reckless. They called her naive. They called her foolish. But Shirley called it obedience. And she paid for that obedience, not just with money, but with exhaustion, isolation, and the constant pressure of being misunderstood. Still, she kept singing. Because she believed voices weren't meant to impress. They were meant to heal. Blending gospel with the world. In the late 1970s, Shirley shocked the gospel world again. At a time when gospel music was expected to sound one way, slow tempos, traditional harmonies, predictable arrangements, Shirley released Message for the People in 1978. It blended gospel with funk rhythms, with contemporary instrumentation, with grooves that made people move instead of sit still. And pastors were furious. Traditionalists accused her of watering down the message. Some churches banned her music from their pulpits. Critics said she was trying to sound secular. Others warned she was compromising holiness. But the people loved it. The album sold over 1 million copies, something Shirley had never experienced before. Her record sales jumped by 400%. Secular radio stations began playing gospel music. R&B artists reached out for collaborations. Young listeners who'd never stepped into church suddenly knew her voice by heart. She had done what few thought possible. She made gospel accessible, without losing its soul. And now, doors were opening not just for her, but for generations behind her. Artists who once felt trapped between faith and sound suddenly saw possibility. But success didn't protect Shirley from criticism. It didn't protect her from isolation. It didn't protect her from the constant pressure of being misunderstood. By churches, by industry leaders, by people who couldn't accept that faith didn't have to sound one way to be real. Some called her rebellious. Some called her disobedient. Some called her arrogant. But Shirley kept singing. Because she wasn't trying to please traditions. She was trying to reach people. And sometimes, doing the right thing feels exactly like standing alone. Ask yourself, would you keep going if your own community turned against you, even when you knew you were doing what you believed was right? Love, marriage, and a new role. In 1983, Shirley married Bishop Harold Ivory Williams. She was 44 years old, older than most women were expected to marry in church culture at the time. And yet, she walked into love with confidence, clarity, and joy. The wedding was massive. Over 100 people in the wedding party. Her ring held 9 diamonds, each one representing the 9 spiritual gifts. But not everyone celebrated. Fans worried she was stepping away from music to become a pastor's wife. Critics said she was abandoning her calling. Some accused her of choosing status over service. They were wrong. Shirley didn't leave music. She expanded her mission. Together, she and her husband became co-pastors of a church in Raleigh that grew to over 2,500 members. She preached. She taught. She counseled. She mentored. She prayed with addicts at midnight and grieving parents at dawn. And she still toured. She still recorded. She still sang. She just added preaching to her calling, not instead of it. From 1984 to 1986, she won back-to-back Grammy Awards, including one with Al Green. That success sparked rumors. Some claimed the awards were rigged. Others said the industry had favorites. Some accused her of abandoning gospel purity for recognition. By that point, Shirley had received 17 Grammy nominations, more than any gospel artist in history at the time. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She didn't argue. She sang. Because she had learned something powerful early on. You don't need to convince people when your work speaks for itself. But even success carries weight. It carries expectations. It carries pressure. It carries loneliness. And behind the applause, Shirley was learning that sometimes your greatest blessings bring your hardest tests. The accident that nearly killed her. That same year, 1983, Shirley nearly died. Her tour bus slid on black ice during winter travel. The road disappeared beneath them. The vehicle spun. Then darkness. She lost consciousness. Later, she said she felt like she crossed over, like she saw the other side. Like her body wasn't her body anymore. Like she was floating somewhere peaceful, somewhere quiet, somewhere beyond pain. Paramedics pulled her from the wreckage and saved her life. But Shirley didn't walk away unchanged. That experience haunted her, and transformed her. It inspired her to record Jesus, I Love Calling Your Name, a song that would become one of the most requested funeral songs in America. Families played it in moments of grief. Hospitals used it during end-of-life care. Churches sang it when words failed. But every time Shirley performed it, she remembered the crash. The moment her life almost ended. The moment she almost didn't come back. And perhaps that's why her performances grew more intense, more emotional, more urgent, as if she knew every note might be her last. Because when you've stared at death, time stops feeling guaranteed. And every breath becomes sacred. Ask yourself, if you knew today might be your last performance, your last conversation, Your last chance to give. Would you live differently? Shirley did. The love she couldn't save. In 1983, Shirley married the love of her life. 31 years later, she lost him. Bishop Williams passed away in 2014, and with him went not just her husband, but her emotional anchor. He had been her confidant, her protector, her prayer partner, her quiet place. Their marriage wasn't perfect. No marriage is, but it was deep. They laughed together, prayed together, built together, weathered storms together. And suddenly, he was gone. But grief didn't end there. What followed was something far more painful than widowhood. Her stepchildren turned against her in a bitter estate battle. Private matters became public warfare. Accusations flew. Lawsuits followed. Family unity shattered. People who once called her mom now called her enemy. Personal pain became headlines. Trust became betrayal. Love became litigation. Then came something even stranger. Fake stories began circulating online claiming Shirley Caesar had died. Fans mourned her while she was still alive. Memorial posts spread across social media. Prayer chains formed for a woman who was still breathing. She watched her own death trend on the internet. As if that weren't enough, even her own siblings accused her of exploiting their mother's pain for fame, despite the decades Shirley had spent caring for her without outside help. Let's pause here. Imagine giving away half your income to feed strangers, and losing your own family in the process. Imagine helping millions find hope, but being unable to find peace in your own home. Imagine surviving poverty, racism, exploitation, corruption, sexism, and near-death, only to be undone by betrayal from the people closest to you. That was Shirley Caesar's reality. Her greatest tragedy wasn't losing her voice. It was losing her family. And yet, she didn't quit. She didn't disappear. She didn't retreat from the world. She showed up. Still, ask yourself, what hurts more, losing strangers or losing people you loved and trusted most? And how would you survive that loss while still standing in front of crowds telling them to believe in hope? The cost of... But strength can be isolating. People assume strong people don't hurt. They assume faith protects you from heartbreak. They assume success shields you from betrayal. It doesn't. Shirley once said that helping others didn't buy her peace. Giving away 75% of her earnings over time didn't protect her from loneliness. Singing hope into the world didn't guarantee love would stay. She was tired. Physically tired from decades of touring. Emotionally tired from betrayal. Spiritually tired from carrying everyone else's pain while hiding her own. And yet, she didn't stop giving. She didn't stop serving. She didn't stop singing. Why? Because for Shirley Caesar, faith wasn't a transaction. It wasn't about blessings. It wasn't about protection. It wasn't about guarantees. It was about obedience, even when obedience hurt. Ask yourself, would you still serve if faith stopped feeling rewarding? Would you still give if love didn't come back? Would you still believe if obedience cost you comfort? Shirley did. Why her story matters today. Shirley Caesar's life isn't just a music story. It's a story about a child forced into adulthood before she could finish childhood. A woman who turned trauma into testimony. An artist who challenged racism, sexism, and exploitation without losing grace. A humanitarian who gave more than she kept. A wife who loved deeply and lost painfully. A believer who stayed faithful even when family turned away. Her story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What does success really cost? How much should one person give? Is it possible to save the world and still lose your home? And perhaps most importantly, what do we owe ourselves after we've given everything to others? Shirley Caesar never stopped showing up. Even after betrayal. Even after loss. Even after heartbreak. She kept lifting her voice, not because life was fair, but because faith demanded courage. And courage doesn't mean fearlessness. It means moving forward while afraid. AIDS, courage, and open doors. For Shirley Caesar, music was never just entertainment. It was survival. In the mid-1980s, when fear of AIDS paralyzed churches across America, Shirley did something radical. She opened hers. While others closed their doors, she sent volunteers into hospitals. While families abandoned loved ones, she held their hands. While society whispered judgment, she spoke love. Nearly half the country believed AIDS was divine punishment. Yet Shirley stood firm and said, "Jesus loves everyone." And people didn't like that. She received death threats. Church members walked out. Donors pulled funding. Pastors criticized her publicly. But she refused to retreat. Because she believed faith wasn't about who deserved compassion, it was about who needed it. Ask yourself, would you stand up for the rejected when doing so costs you reputation, safety, and support? Would you love people when loving them makes others hate you? Shirley did. The body that began to fail. At the same time, her body was breaking down. Decades of non-stop touring, preaching weekly, recording constantly, sleeping on planes, living out of suitcases. Her voice, the instrument she depended on, developed nodules. Doctors warned her she could permanently lose her ability to sing. She required steroid injections just to perform. Some days, she couldn't speak above a whisper. And yet, she kept going. She recorded albums while in pain. She preached while exhausted. She toured while barely able to breathe deeply. During the award season that earned her Artist of the Decade, she could barely speak during her acceptance speech, yet still praised God through tears. How many people would keep giving when their strength is nearly gone? How many would keep serving when the very thing they depend on, their body, begins to betray them? Shirley did. Not because she felt strong, but because she believed quitting would cost her calling. Bridging generations. By the 1990s, Shirley wasn't just shaping gospel. She was bridging generations. She performed with Whitney Houston at the Grammys. She mentored Yolanda Adams, Kirk Franklin, and countless young artists behind the scenes, offering guidance, prayer, and protection when fame tried to swallow them whole. She turned down million-dollar secular crossover deals for them, warning that success without purpose could cost their calling. Would you turn down fortune to protect your faith? Would you sacrifice your own advancement to preserve someone else's integrity? Shirley did. And many of today's gospel icons credit her not just for influence, but for survival.